Hello, guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Skills and Abilities. Today, we're going to be going over another one of these summons. This one is going to be the Summon Tainted. The Summon Tainted is a interesting one. It is the Tainted that we all know and hate, except he doesn't use the same ability that he normally uses. He uses a completely different ability, the Fireball. At least what it looks like to me. You can have several of them out if you have a maxed out demonic mastery, so you can have 3 of them. And they seem to be specifically fire based, in that they tend to do specifically fire resistant or fire damage. If you look underneath their feet too, they also for some reason have access to the Paladin resist fire aura, which is giving me a rather large amount of fire resistance. As you can see, if I kill them real quick, I lose the fire resistance aura, and my resistances go down to 29%. So actually quite interesting to see that there are auras coming from these guys, which makes even having just one of these guys on hand for a fire build actually quite nice. When you take them out and you actually let them go fight things, they tend to shoot fireballs and stuff. They do have some melee attacks as well, but for the most part, it's just fireballs. As you can see, I don't really have very good level in these guys. So let's put some points into them so they can actually attack better. Now they can actually do some damage. And they're just going to sit there and they're going to cast their fireballs. They actually do make a really interesting addition to a fire damage build. So if you happen to be doing like a Ring of Fire, Flame Wave, Apocalypse build, you could potentially combine them together with some Tainted for access to even more fire damage via the minions. Also, if you're utilizing the consume ability, they also have the ability to consume them for a pretty nice negative 15% enemy fire resistance and 20% fire skill damage, which there are other better consumes that you can potentially use, but this one's easy and super duper 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 like convenient. So like if you happen to be a fire character like a Ring of Fire, Flame Wave, or Apocalypse, you can very easily 1-point wonder consume and 1-point wonder summon Tainted and just simply consume one for the negative resistance buff, which is actually really nice. And then we'll just eat one. Delicious. And now we have our negative 15% enemy fire resistance, and we also have the other benefit that he gives us, which is the 20% skill damage as well, which ups the overall damage of our fire abilities, which is really nice. All in all, they're definitely like very interesting summons, especially for fire builds. And not only that, but you could definitely do like an entire fire build setup on them. Now, if you want to make them tankier so that they don't die, and I totally forgot to mention, if you consume one, you can't just summon another one. The consumption buff actually does take the place of one of the 3 demons or 2 demons that you have access to, or 1 demon in that case. And in this particular case with the Summon Tainted, I'm eating one of them to gain that buff so I can do more fire damage. But you can, of course, still have 2 more on top of the 1 buff that I have. However, if I do eat another one, you'll notice that the buff disappears from me, or I summon another one, the buff will disappear. I mean, them having the fire resistance aura makes them really neat for just simply a single summon in an army. The damage of the fire damage actually is affected by demonic mastery for some reason, which is kind of odd. I didn't really expect that to be the case, but you can also get more fire damage out of them by beefing up the blood boil, which is going to bring their fire damage up to 7,276 to 8,106, which is kind of crazy, actually. It's kind of a nutty amount of fire damage that you can potentially get out of these guys. And if you think about it, since there are 3 of them, you get 3 times 8,106, which means that they could potentially be dishing out a massive amount of 1,806 times 3, which is 24,318 damage per rotation, which is pretty darn good. Now, I don't necessarily think the 3 of these guys is ever really the optimal setup, and the reason for this is because you can, of course, get like a Conviction Aura, like a monster or something of that nature to add into the mix, which would be probably better than having 3 of them. There are a lot of really interesting options for Blind Demon, And I do think Bind Demon could make interesting choices. Also, you could potentially just go for a tanky demon, like a Summon Goatman, or get like a Lister the Tormentor or something through Bind Demon, just so that you have a support character essentially alongside your little summons. All in all, the Tainted is definitely a good addition to pretty much any fire build, even if you're just going to eat them and get the resistances and the fire skill damage. And then on top of that, they also make for some very interesting damage output creatures as well if you want to go for like a full fire summon character, which is totally a thing because Blood Boil also does fire damage. So you have the fire damage from the Blood Boil, you have the fire damage from the Tainted, and then of course you also have your own fire damage if you go into a fire damage build, and then you can stack negative resistances, which you can then apply to, the monster through Conviction Aura, or you can get negative resistances on your gear, or even through eating some of the monsters. It's actually kind of crazy how good the like synergistic nature of this stuff is, where like if you build the Tainted and you build the fire together, you get like a really nice good effect. Or if you build like like the Defiler with the magic builds, you get good effects. You can also potentially just like summon them on targets by using the Death Mark. I'm not exactly sure you would want to use Death Mark with these guys though, because they don't really seem like they're melee characters. And I kind of feel like that you could use it though, but it's definitely going to put them more in harm's way than they would otherwise normally be. But it definitely does give you like the ability to just sit there and smack them onto a target so they can just fireball. I am noticing that sometimes when they're in melee range they will melee, but for the most part they seem to prefer their beloved fireball instead. And of course the death mark itself also helps by increasing their damage a little bit, which isn't awful. But as you can see, they're starting to take damage, and I've already lost one of them in the pile. Because, well, summoning a caster into a melee situation isn't really the brightest idea. Now, you can also utilize all sorts of other things with these guys. You could use a Defiler to spread their damage between other things. So if you summon one Defiler in the mix, the Defiler has the ability to link targets together and essentially allow your single fireball to deal damage to multiple targets. And by linking targets, when the fireballs hit one, the fireball is hitting essentially everything that is linked in that chain, which can definitely help increase the overall damage of your Tainted. Which is really nice. In general, though, if you want to make the Tainted tankier, which they do seem to need to be a little tankier, the Blood Oath ability is extraordinarily good for making them tanky. Demonic Mastery is good for increasing their damage, and Blood Oath is good for making them tankier. It gives them life, it gives them resistances, gives them physical damage reduction, and also shares some of that physical damage, or rather damage with you. When you take damage, you can share it with your monsters, sharing the load, essentially, to use a Lord of the Rings quote. I definitely think that these guys could make an interesting build. I'm not entirely sure they're going to work their way into every single build, like magic builds and physical builds and like pure summon builds. But one of them could definitely be useful in any build for the fire resistance. And I can definitely see some interesting builds just around them in general because they do pretty decent fire damage. I would probably pair them up with a Bind Demon of some type that can assist them in getting their damage to a stronger degree, but I guess we'll see. I'm really kind of impressed with these guys so far. The Goatman has been really good. The Tainted is really good. They all have their own individual bonuses and their own individual effectiveness. Like the Goatman has Crushing Blow, the Tainted has the Resist Aura, and the Defiler has the ability to share damage between targets, which is really cool. And we're going to be covering this one next, so why not? As always, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe button if you enjoy the content, and keep watching.